Yes, but I'm always flabbergasted really by the fact that the list of sanctioned persons are not the same for the different sanction regimes. Yeah. So if you have someone, I mean, it really means not that someone's on the EU list is not on the Swiss list, but there are people who are on the Swiss list and not on the EU list, the US list, UK list, etc., etc. There's differences. There's really differences. Right. Yeah. And the point is, how do we deal with these differences? I mean, what sanction regime counts? I mean, essentially, if we say these are our business partners, according to the Embargo Act, all would count, but they don't consent. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, I would, you know, your question is also to, I think, what are the criteria of ending up on a sanctions list? And my experience in the end of the day is it's a purely political decision. Yes, you may have, or you know, you maybe have a lot of bad people who were involved in bad business, or who you can connect to a certain business or a certain activity. You know, for example, military or you know, paramilitary or whatever. But then you have a number of persons who are on this list. Because it said that they are, you know, in the case of Russia, that they have a certain proximity to the Russian government or, you know, to the Russian president. But that mostly is a political decision, and there are no set criteria, you know. So, for example, I remember when the U.S. started sanctions in 2018, where they started to put well-known people on the sanctions list. That was based on a proposal, if I remember correctly, by Congress, who said, well, get us the 50 most important, you know, people in Russia, and you know, coincidentally, that list conformed to the Forbes list, pretty much the same. Exactly the same, you know. And so the decision how you end up on this list is political, and I don't think there are legal considerations behind this, and therefore it's also difficult. For example, if you have a client that wants to come off the list, so if you are, you know, put in a certain position saying, yeah, you have ties to here and you're doing this and that, and then you have to come and say, no, it's not true, because, you know, now some people, they were successful in getting off that list, because obviously a court looked at it in a different manner and said, well, there's nothing established here. So I don't know if that addresses your question, you know, but I think it's a very non-legal way that is on the basis of such list of determining who is ending up.
That's, I mean, perhaps to make it clear to our viewers, no, that's the same in Switzerland. The Embargo Act states clearly in Article 1, sanctions are political measures, politically induced measures to force countries, etc., etc., etc. So it's not about individuals. It's not about any wrongdoing by these individuals. So it's really a political measure. That makes it difficult, I think, from a legal perspective for the criteria, because if the criteria then differ between different sanction regimes, there are, of course, politically good reasons to have someone on the list or not. It depends on your political position. And I find this irritating or difficult to deal with, because for us, essentially, I always say legal people essentially want to have clear-cut rules and it's just not clear cut.
No, and you know, you have these questions coming up. For example, you're dealing with residence questions of a person who is affiliated with a company that may be on a list, not in Switzerland, but maybe in another country. And then, you know, an authority in Switzerland might argue, yes, but this person is affiliated with a sanctioned entity. And then, you know, you say to the authority, yeah, but the sanctions is a foreign sanction, it's not a Swiss sanction, so how can you take this into consideration? And then when you go and look why this company is on the sanctions list, they usually give you a very brief explanation, and it can be as broad as having an important role, company having an important role for the Russian government.
Which is not so bad, I think. Essentially, when we decided upon the Embargo Act, the idea was more or less to block goods from coming into Switzerland or from going out of Switzerland. So there's not the question of individuals. What we now have is really the mixing up of states or entities, large entities with individuals, and that's, I think, problematic for us, because what is the consequence if you are dealing with a person who wants to strike a deal with a person on the list, or the person is itself on the list? What is the difference? What changes if you get on a list?
Well, if you're on a list as an individual, you're radioactive, you know, for another. So you're not allowed basically to deal with this person, because you know, usually deal with a person to get paid for something or to do a deal. You're not allowed, you know, you're not allowed to do this. So basically, this person gets isolated. Now it's a choice, yes. But then the question is also, what are the consequences for Switzerland, for example, who issued the sanctions? What do you do with, for example, if that person owns companies that employ a large number of employees in Switzerland or in Europe? You know, all these things have surfaced on time. Then, you know, there were solutions where, you know, the authorities said, okay, we can do some ring fencing mechanisms, so we kind of isolate the company with the employees, and we just make sure that the money doesn't flow out on the top, you know. But after all, it's in our best interest in Europe and in Switzerland. But again, for the legal certainty, it's very difficult, you know, to deal with it, you know, because you're a lot of questions you don't have a clear answer on a lot of questions.
And the point of what I really find problematic is that essentially there are no clear-cut criteria to decide or to even know how to deal with it. And the second thing is that essentially you're blocked, as you said, radioactive, and you can't anymore use your own fortune. You can't. Your means are simply blocked.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think many people don't know what that means. You can't go to the bank and get money to see a doctor.
No.
You must ask the authorities.
You must ask SECO, and then if you're lucky, the bank follows SECO's advice that yes, you can get payments for this and that, for necessities, but it's a huge lot of time you have to invest in that. You know. Now they have created a form SECO to make it easier. But
essentially, that's for the individual, it's really problematic, and you can't simply ask your relatives or friends because
because you're not allowed to give them money.
Yeah. So it's really it is a big problem for the individual, and I think this is what I see problematic in the whole structure, that it concerns individuals for political reasons. It's not, they're not suspected criminals, They're just individuals for political reasons, that, etc. And I find that rather, I mean, I can live with that even in a state where rule of law is guaranteed, if there are criteria, but there are none.
No, there are none, because it would just make it that more difficult to put people on the list. And I mean, back to your question, or what you mentioned, Switzerland takes over the sanctions. Those names are not, as far as I know, they're not checked, because because the moment they're published in Europe, usually the names lists are very quickly published within a few days afterwards in Switzerland. Yeah. And then you wonder, why is this person on the list? Now you mentioned something. There's no criminal actions or anything. That's a completely different story. Yeah. You don't need criminal action.
Exactly.
But the perception I have seen often is that sanction equal criminal. Exactly. Equal, let's get their money. Yeah. Money of individuals is Russian money. Yeah. Exactly. And there, I think our system takes a whole lot of shortcuts in that area, which I think is something that should be questioned very strongly. Yeah.
In fact, no. I mean, if blocking, for example, the assets of someone raises the question, who then is to administer these assets, and what is, if there is a financial loss because nobody is really administering? I mean, it's simply blocked. So it's, to my mind, it seems rather difficult questions.
Well, I can just give you the example of what I know and what I heard. Is for example, all those countries who blocked the big yachts, they regretted it because they have to maintain the yachts, and now it's the taxpayer who pays for the maintenance of those expensive yachts. Which is maybe not the result that people wanted. And then plus, you cannot repo a yacht. I think it's not possible, at least not in Switzerland, repo an asset that is sanctioned. There's no way to do this. Yeah.
No, in fact, this, to my mind, seems the biggest, or at the heart of the problem, that no clear reflection has been made about political and legal. About the difference between political and legal criteria, and for us, I always say I'm a lawyer. I'm simply asking legal questions. All I want to have is to have criteria, and essentially I'm not asking the motivation or the sense of it. It's just criteria, and if I don't have that, my job becomes really difficult.
Yeah, if not impossible.
If not impossible. Yeah. And that's what I see at the moment, and most people don't know, because really my impression is the same as yours now, that they really think that these are essentially at least suspected criminals. It's simply not true. The law clearly states it's politically motivated measure.
I think another issue which I see in this context, it's a bit even a broader view, is the banks have a very important role in implementing the sanctions, as they have in money laundering measures and so on. But in our system, and I think this is something we should consider, that in our system, the government has basically outsourced their functions to the banks a long time ago with respect to money laundering. And now, if you look at the latest developments, there are those advocating that, yes, we also need to make sure that the sanctions are implemented by the banks. And what are the banks doing? You mentioned it before, they're looking on their own risk, they're making their own assessment. So we're in a situation where sanctions are enforced by the banks. SECO can say whatever they want. The banks say, we do our own analysis because we also have to listen to US, UK, and what have you. And the effect is that the person who is, concerned with this, what can they do? They cannot go to a court and say this is a government action that is not allowed, because it's not the government acting. So they have to go to court and fight for some, breach of contract, where you have general terms and conditions of the bank that exclude pretty much any right that you have. And you're basically frustrating the whole purpose of the rule of law this way. You're implementing a political goal with this. You kind of set aside the legal mechanism to protect. And in the end, you have, not just the sanctioned one, but everyone is concerned with this in the end of the day.